So the question is, or the lecture is on experimental, behavioral, and neuronal game theory. I hope that after the lecture you have a kind of an idea what this all means. So this game theory, as it says, the last two terms, but it also deviates a little bit from the other two game theory lectures, I guess, you have seen already in the series, and the other, I don't know, 3 or 4 more that are coming. Okay, so let me just start what we're going to talk today about. So I'm sure you have heard already in this lecture, or otherwise maybe before you even ended the Studium Generale lecture series, the Nash equilibrium. The Nash equilibrium is an important concept in game theory. It's the important concept, perhaps. So it describes how players who follow particular rules, who follow particular axioms of behavior, should play a game or should behave in a strategic situation. So if you talk to game theorists, then they talk about players, and game theory is really about players and players in the theoretical sense. So the question I'm asking here, and behavioral game theory more generally asks, whether the Nash equilibrium is describing not only the behavior of players, so ideal players, or whether it's also describing the behavior of real people like you and me in everyday behavior, or in negotiations situations, in situations in the supermarket, in situations when we meet other people and interact with other people. So that's one question I'm trying to talk about today, whether that's the case, and if it's not the case, whether there are ways out where we can, in a sense, amend game theory such that it helps to explain real people's behavior. The other aspect goes back even further in history, in economic history, back to Adam Smith and others who postulate that economic agents should and are selfish, and that this selfish behavior in the market leads to, for instance, efficient outcomes. And this is an assumption that is also held in game theory, right? So that if people play a game and they can earn some money with that, then they will try to find the strategy that increase or that maximizes the chances to optimize their own income without really taking much care of the welfare of other people, or perhaps put it more concretely or more specifically, that they do not take care of the welfare of others into account, as long as they do not affect their own behavior or their own welfare. Sorry. Okay, so that's going to be the two big questions here. Is the Nash equilibrium describing real people's behavior, and are real people as selfish as assumed in standard game theory? For this, I've put forward a short outline of the lecture today. So we'll give a very short, not really an introduction, but an overview in how the experimental method entered game theory and economics. This will be done briefly in a sort of quotes of famous game theorists and famous economists, and how they viewed the use of experiments, controlled experiments in economics and game theory. Thereafter, I would like to move on and to deal with the first question, namely, is the Nash equilibrium describing real people's behavior, and talk about boundedly rational reasoning. I mean, this gives you already a hint that perhaps real people do not act as proposed by the Nash equilibrium, because it might be some boundedly rational reasoning behind it. Thereafter, move on and try to give some answers to the second question, about are real people as selfish as assumed in standard game theory, by diving a little bit into the problem of social interaction and how how one could view how people behave in social interactions. So do they always follow their selfish motive, or are there also other motives in play? and what we can say, what we know about this, and what we can say about that. Because it's also about neural game theory, and I'm also engaged in what's called neuroeconomics, we'll also tell you a little bit about the neurobiological basis of bounded rational reasoning, but also of reasoning in social interactions. Okay, so that's the plan. But before we're going to do this, there will be some interaction. I hope this works out. So what I would like to do with you is a little experiment in a so-called guessing contest. So some of you might have heard of it. Some of you might even already have participated in it. But I guess most of you will not. And even if most of you have, it's not a bad thing. So I think it's nevertheless interesting to see what comes out. But let me first explain because now you have to do something, but what you have to do, I will tell you line by line. So this is going to be a decision-making experiment, and you will make your decision, I guess, on your laptop, your smartphone, wherever you are, and listening to me here and watching my slides. But before you do that, I ask you to listen carefully to me, at least for these 2 slides. So this is a simple decision-making contest. And if this would be a real experiment, or if you would do this live in the lecture hall, then you would be able to earn some real money with this, which would be paid out in cash at the end of the lecture. So that's not possible. So therefore, this is grayed out, and you have to now imagine that you could earn this real money at the end of the lecture. Okay. Important is, so how much you actually earn, hypothetically now, will depend on your own decision and on the decisions of all other participants. So we will conduct this contest for 2 rounds. But first, now we will only play 1 round. Okay. So during the experiment, so when you make your decisions, I ask you not to communicate with others around you, or also not with others who are in this lecture, in case you know who is in this in the audience of this lecture. Okay, so these are the general rules. But what do we have to do? So you have to guess an integer number between 0 and 100, inclusive 0 or 100. That is, you can guess any number from, as you see here, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up to 98, 99, 100. Okay. So that's easy. So you will just have to choose a number. However, there's some twist to this. So after everybody has guessed her or his number, so we will collect this. We will do this via the internet now, or in a second. We will collect all your guesses, and we will calculate the average of all guess numbers. So I don't know how many, so there are now about 70-something people in the audience. So we will collect from each of you 1 number, and then in principle we will calculate the average of all these guess numbers. And you win this contest if your guess number is the number closest to 1/2 of the average of all guess numbers. So that's important. So you guess 1 number, then the average is calculated, and of that we take 1/2. And if your number is closest to this 1/2 of the average of all your numbers, including your own, then you win this game. Otherwise, you're not a winner. And then as a rule, so if only 1 of you have guessed the winning number, then this is the only winner. If there are more than 1 of you guessed the winning number, then we will choose this randomly from those the winners. Okay. So I hope this is clear. And I also have to say, we are not going to calculate. I mean, you can't earn the money. So that I said already. So I nevertheless ask you to try to imagine that you are in the situation that you can earn this money, and you would like to earn this money, so that you would like to win this game, and that you which means that you try to be as close as possible to 1/2 of the average of all numbers guessed by the audience of this lecture. Okay, so in the lecture I would ask any questions. I don't know. So perhaps if there are questions in the Q&A, looking at Noor.
Until now, I don't see any questions, but if you have, feel free to.
So there's something in the chat, I think, maybe there.
Yeah, there were some problems with logging in at the beginning.
Okay. So it had nothing to do with that. Okay, so but there seem to be no questions. So everything is clear, it seems. Okay, then let's move on. Okay, so now we said we played this twice, but now we play round 1, and the second round will be played later. But now just be concerned about the first round. So as said, please think about which number you would like to choose in this game, where the winner is who chooses the number that is closest to 1/2 of the average of all guessed numbers. And now Noor will share her screen with you and give you instructions how you can type in the number you have chosen.
So then I move to the technical part of our experiment. So now you can see this page. Can you see it, Arno?
I can see it, yes.
Yes. So if you now go to WooClap and then use this code that I'm referring here, then you can actually log in and then type in your number or your suggesting number when you take part into the game, and then we'll look at the results later. If something doesn't work, just let me know via the chat.
So someone is saying, I don't know how to send my guest number.
Are you already in the WooClap? Okay. If you yes, thanks. If you use that link, then you can you directly come to the opening site, and then you can type in the number. So it's getting exciting, but already 44 of you made their guessing.
Okay, so I think we're at 92%.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, and it gets stuck here. So don't show the word cloud.
No, I was just like,
Okay, so I think it's stuck at 92%. I think that's fine. So I guess I will just move on with the lecture. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so I will start sharing my screen again. I mean, those who have not yet guessed the number, they can still do it. So I'll just move on with the.
Yeah, the chat is still, the clap is still open, so you can still put your votes in.
Yeah. Okay, so I think you should see my screen again. So Noor, do you see it?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, so this was the first round, and as I said, we'll come back to this later. But first, let me give you some idea of experimental economics. So what are experiments? So that's just a first schematic idea. Okay, what experiments are. So experiments are, if you want to call it like this, an element in the engine of science. It's related to theory. So what does theory do? Ideally, so game theory makes predictions about people's behavior. We look at the data, and this data could be happenstance data or experimental data. So these are the most important data sources we have. And if once we look at this data and see how people behave in particular situations, so this should feed into the theory again, and hopefully leads to improvement. So that's kind of the idea of how we use experiments or data more generally in science, or in economic science, or in game theory. Okay. So I said, so there are happenstance data and experimental data. Happenstance data are very useful. They are also those who are still used most, I would say. So for instance, happenstance data is data from flower auctions, if you're interested in how prices in auctions are formed, but also the behavior and the pandemic, right? So the data that is now collected by the RIVM or other institutions trying to understand how people behave during the pandemic. This is happenstance data, because it's not controlled. You know, there are not some people who are not in a pandemic and others who are in a pandemic. So in this sense, it's a non-controlled data collection, but still it's very useful and important. However, there are some downsides to this data. And first of all, so often they do not include key variables one is interested in. For instance, if you're interested in how information about other traders' behavior in auctions would influence other traders' behavior, then we would like to control this, or to change this, to vary this in an exogenous controlled way. And that's, of course, usually not possible. You cannot just go to an auctioneer and say, okay, could you please use one information condition today and another information condition tomorrow. They're often noisy. So that's a general problem of happenstance data generation process, that you have lots of measurement errors. And they do not allow for replication. And the reason for that, of course, is that it's not a controlled environment. So most of the time, the exact same circumstances cannot be repeated. Also, because sometimes the exact circumstances people are in when they make decisions are not even known. And we cannot say much about causality. I mean, there are no ways of doing this also with happenstance data. So actually the Nobel Prize last year was for that, for using so-called natural experiments, so policy choices, policy changes to get at causal evidence. But usually it's very hard to use or to make causal interpretations from happenstance data. So this is where experiments come in. So where we can use experiments to get a grip at this for issues I just mentioned. So before we are going into that a little bit more, so let's think about what is an experiment. So and what are, at least in my view, so the two main features of an experiment, which also differentiates them from happenstance data. So this is a quote from Bastable on the study of natural philosophy. So an experiment is, in the scientific sense, and that's not only applying to economic or game theory experiments, but experiments more general, is putting in action causes and agents over which we have control, and purposely varying their combinations and noticing what effects take place. So, and there are two parts of this which are important. So one is putting in action causes and agents over which we have control. So that's an important aspect of running experiments, that you can really control the whole environment you put people into. For instance, you can put people into one information condition where they have information about the behavior of others, or another one where they do not have information about the behavior of others. The second is that we purposely vary their combinations and noticing what effects take place. And this is basically causality. Because we can change, for instance, the information condition from one to the other, we can then see how the behavior changes from one to the other situation. And if this information condition is the only thing we've changed, then we can draw causal conclusions that this is the change in the information condition has led to the change in behavior we have observed. So that's, you know, on a high level, what is an experiment? But what is an experiment in economics and game theory? So could call this, it's a controlled situation in which individuals, mostly but not always humans, take actions according to some pre-specified rules which determine their control over rewards. So that's a long sentence, but I mean, what it basically says, so game theory delivers you or works with games, as it says, and you've heard this in the last 2 lectures, and these games are basically rules of behavior. So if you're in a game which says we are interested how people, for instance, in a monopoly or in a Stackelberg monopoly, where there's one firm who moves first, let's say sets some quantity in how much to produce, and the other firm can observe this and then respond to this. This are clear rules of behaviors of one firm moves first and the other firm moves second, and that's a controlled situation, whereas we say we could also look into a situation where both firms move at the same time. These are clearly specified rules. And we mostly use money for this reward, but they said, right, you know, there are also experiments run or have been run with animals, particularly with rats. And of course, in this case, the reward is mostly food or sugared water, things like that. Okay. Secondly, the environmental elements of interest are varied in order to observe the causal effects. What I said it before, right? So if you want to know how a particular way of providing an information about others' behavior has an effect on behavior of oneself, then you would like to vary this variable of interest. Perhaps an example could be that whether if you ask people whether they would wear a face mask, you can give them information about how many other people are wearing a face mask, versus you do not give them information about how many other people are wearing a face mask, and then see whether people tend to wear this face mask more or less often, in case that they know the information or do not have the information about the behavior of others. Often in experiments involve strategic situations. These are the games, therefore now behavioral game theory, where one's earnings depend on the own and on the other actions. Right. So that was on a high level, a very brief introduction into how to think about experiments and why experiments might be useful in conducting. Now let me give you a very short history in quotes about how the views about experiments have changed, because experimental economics or experimental game theory is, given the whole history of economics and game theory, relatively young still, although it's now quite established, although not fully. So there are still some mainstream economist game theorists who think experiments are useless, but there has been some change over the years. So this is a quote from a textbook in economics from 1985 by 2 very famous economists, Samuelson and Nordhaus, and they had in their preface to this textbook for students. They were saying one possible way of figuring out economic laws is by controlled experiments. Economists, unfortunately, cannot perform the controlled experiments of chemists, biologists, and so on and so forth. So basically, this was the view, and this was pretty much the standard view in the 1980s, so that you cannot perform experiments in economics. This didn't change much up to the early 90s, so that's a quote from the Encyclopedia Britannica, where it says, economists are frequently criticized due to economics not being a science. And why not? Because there exists no laboratory to prove scientific hypothesis. So there was still also the view that you cannot use experiments in economics. Then, however, so things went on very fast. So this is jumping to 2002. So that's about 10 years later than this quote here. There was the Bank of Sweden Prize in Economic Sciences in the memory of Alfred Nobel, and so I read the quote of the reasoning of the committee. Traditional economic theory has relied on the assumption of homo economicus, whose behavior is governed by self-interest and who is capable of rational decision-making. Economics has also been regarded as a non-experimental science. That's the 1990 view, where researchers, as in astronomy or meteorology, have had to rely exclusively on field data, that is direct observations of the real world. During the last 2 decades, however, these views have undergone a transformation. Controlled laboratory experiments have emerged as a vital component of economic research, and then they describe further why this is useful. And this Nobel Prize went to Daniel Kahneman and Vernon Smith. So Vernon Smith was the one who received it for introducing experiments into economics, and Daniel Kahneman for introducing psychological insights into economics. So this is the behavioral economics side, and this is the Smith is the experimental economics side. And then, of course, the thing went on. So Jürgen Weibel, a very famous game theorist, then already in 2004 wrote that an important development in economics is the emergence of experimental economics, because it's moving from armchair theorizing to controlled laboratory experiments, and maybe as important as the step in the development of economic theory as it once was for the natural sciences to move from Aristotelian scholastic speculation to modern empirical science. So here you see, how the view has developed, and this is just to give a brief overview on a larger scale. So one can view back, actually, if you look about experiments in economics and game theory, perhaps go back to Bernoulli's and Witherspoon paradox, which was not a real experiment, it was more a thought experiment, where he gave people, the possibility to play a lottery, and basically the lottery is where you can earn, if people play the lottery, in expectation and an infinite amount of money. But if you present this lottery to people, then usually they are not willing to pay an infinite amount of money to play this lottery. And he then concluded that expected value is not a good concept of describing behavior of humans, and that led to the introduction of concepts like risk aversion, so that people dislike risk and therefore might not pay an infinite amount for a lottery which has actually an infinite expected value. Later in the 1930s, so some first experiments were run on indifference curves in economics. Then 1944, von Neumann Morgenstern, I mean, that was one of the most important events in game theory, right? This was when their book came out on game theory, because they basically provided the foundation of expected utility in game theory. In 1944 already were the first market experiments, the first controlled market experiments run. 1953, LA put forward his paradox, where it turned out that the expected utility theory, which was introduced here by von Neumann and Morgenstern, actually could not explain behavior, at least in some situations. Among others, the LA paradox, which led to later on to ideas like prospect theory and the whole input from Kahneman and Tversky and in behavioral economics. In the 1950s was an important time for game theory, where the so-called prisoner's dilemma was used to analyze Cold War strategies between the Soviet Union and the US. So many great scientists were working in the RAND Corporation to analyze strategic games, and also repeated strategic game, which also led to the Cold War strategies that were implemented back then. 1962, Vernon Smith ran his market experiment, for which he received 40 years later the Nobel Prize. And we'll say that in 1980s, 1990s, experimental economics, game theory experiments developed a common concept, a common strategy of how to implement experiments, and it developed a common methodology, and it became increasingly accepted also by non-experimental game theorists and economists, and there were more and more experimental laboratories around the world. So I think one of the first in Europe was in Frankfurt, in Bonn, with Reinhard Selten, also later Nobel laureate in game theory, together with John Nash, who established the first experimental laboratory in Germany, and here in the Netherlands, it was actually in Amsterdam in the early 1980s at Riedl, where the first experiments have been run. So this just gives you once again the overview. So 2002, a Nobel Prize for Kahneman and Smith. 2009, a Nobel Prize for Ostrom and Wilson. Elinor Ostrom, she was also a very important figure in developing experimental and game theoretical experiments, in particular respect to institution formation and the effect of institutions on behavior of people in collective action problems. In 2012, L. Roth received the Nobel Prize. He is also one of the main big figures in experimental economics, one of the leading ones in the US. And not that long ago, in 2017, Dick Taylor received his Nobel Prize, but that's more on the behavioral economic side, so the nudging idea I'm sure you have heard of. Okay. So I think after this brief introduction, or this brief overview of how experiments in economics and game theory developed, I think we would be ready to have a look at what numbers you have chosen in the guessing game of the first round. So Nora, are you here?
Yes, I will share the screen.
Okay, so we see here many different numbers. So 1, 17, 17, 8, 17, 17 seems to be very prominent. 21, 51, 25, 7, 7, 3, 5, 57, 5. So there are lots of numbers. So it would be nice to know what is the most often chosen number, but we not. Okay. Anyway, so I think it takes too long. So now, so let's just move on. So I will share my screen again, and if you try to figure out, perhaps you can figure out.
Definitely, I will try to do it in the main course. I don't know what's going wrong, so I will try to fix this.
Okay, so then I think we will have to skip the second round, because the second round would make sense to do only if we have seen what kind of behavior you have, what kind of numbers you have chosen in the first round. But yeah, maybe perhaps at least we can see what you've chosen in the first round later on, when Nora has figured out the technical problems. Anyway, so what we would have, let me just say what I would have done here. So you would have seen at least an impression of the numbers chosen, particularly, kind of the distribution of these numbers, or which numbers would have been chosen most often, less often, and somewhere in between. And then after having given you this information, we would have played this for a second time, and then see, okay, what would happen in the second time. So, but perhaps we can use now, I don't know whether we can use the Q&A. If someone just wants to use perhaps the chat or so, and tell us what number he or she has chosen, or the Q&A, and tell us a little bit why he or she has chosen that numbers, and I will kind of read this aloud. "25 popped up a lot," someone said. That's correct. So it's okay. Okay, so nobody wants to say what. Okay, then that's just. Oh, are you not? Did you manage to have the cloud?
Yes, somebody put like a great comment that I have to like mark all as red. But
Okay.
yeah, I cannot. Unfortunately, I have to click them one by one. If I click on all, it doesn't take it.
Okay. Now, but let's wait in a little bit. So I think that's interesting. So. Okay, so I think so. Just go on with this and give me a sign when you're done.
It's good. Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. So yeah, that's a typical game. Why is this guessing game a game? Because you make a decision and the outcome depends on the decision, in this case, of all other people in the audience. Because I mean, the average or one half of the average is of course determined by the numbers by all other people typed in. So the question here is, okay, what would be the Nash equilibrium here? So, and the Nash equilibrium in this case, perhaps you've heard about this in the other lectures, can be reached by iterated, so-called iterated elimination of weakly dominated strategies. What does it mean? Okay, let's have a look at this. So this in a sense, this represents all the numbers you can choose from 0 to 100. And then one question would be, so what numbers should you never choose? So because a dominated strategy is a strategy, but that is called like that because it leads to an outcome you do not like at all, right? So, and it's weakly dominated because in the sense that there are other strategies that are better, that guarantee a better outcome that this strategy would do. So one can ask this question in the way, so, okay, so what numbers should one never guess, right? So and the question, for instance, is, should one choose a number larger than 50? Yeah, I'm asking this question already, so it sounds rhetorical, and indeed it is. So one should not choose a number larger than 50. So why is this the case? Because the winning number is one half of the average. So, and even if everyone would choose 100, so the highest possible number, the average can never be higher than 50. So the winning number can never be higher than 50. So therefore, one should never choose a number higher than 50 if you want to win this game. However, now we can go to the second step. So if everyone understands this and everyone thinks like this, what does it mean? So if I know that everyone else in the audience knows that nobody should choose a number larger than 50, then of course I have to go one step further and ask myself, okay, given this situation, what number should I never choose? And here the question is, so should I, for instance, choose a number larger than 25? And again, the same reasoning applies. No. Why should you not do this? Because even if everyone chooses now the highest possible number 50, because everyone has excluded any number larger than 50 already, then of course the one half of the average can never be larger than 25. So the winning number can never be larger than 25. So therefore, you should never choose a number that is larger than 55. And we can go on like this. So if you say, okay, if everyone believes that everyone is never choosing a number larger than 25, which number should you not choose? Yeah, you should never choose a number larger than 12.5. Or if you look at integer number larger than 13, if everyone knows that nobody will ever choose a number larger than 13, then of course so one half of 13 is 6.5. So you should never choose a number larger than 6.5 or 7 if you stick to integers, and so on, and so on, and so on. And what the Nash equilibrium tells us here, so the fully rational solution here is that nobody chooses a number larger than 1. So the only solution to this game is, the only Nash rational solution is to choose 0. That's the Nash equilibrium.
So Arno, I don't know if you can, sorry for the technical issues, but now we managed to have all the results ready.
Okay, then please share it, and let's see if everyone has chosen the Nash equilibrium of 0.
Yeah, I think, can you see it? Is it?
I can. So you've answered. Yes, I can see it. Okay, so everyone else can see it too. So you will see that so there are some people, I don't know how many, who have chosen 0. Fewer have chosen 1. but the most often chosen was 25. So, and many have chosen 17. So, obvious, but what you see is that if I scan it, indeed, so nobody chose a number larger than, oh, there's one number, which is, or two, which are larger than 50, but or 382 is also. But almost no one, so very few people have chosen numbers larger than 50, but also, so in a sense, you know, the weakly dominated strategy was very seldomly chosen. But on the other hand, almost no one has chosen also zero. So what you see, there are many, many numbers in between. So this basically tells us that that the Nash equilibrium is not a good prediction, right, for this kind of game, because as I said, the Nash equilibrium would say you should choose zero in this case. So I will go back and to share my screen again. Okay. Thank you, Nora.
Welcome.
Okay. Okay, so we have seen many have chosen, oops, I'm sorry, up to here. So 25, I think, was the most common number, but almost no one has chosen zero. And actually, so with these numbers you see, if you would have chosen zero, then you also would not have won the game, because obviously, so the winning number perhaps was somewhere between 15 and 25. Okay, so it's also not a very smart thing to play the Nash equilibrium here if you want to win this game. So just skip this. So just to give an idea, so how other people have chosen. So this experiment was run with general student generale audience already in the past. So once in 2014, and what you see here, so this is now round 1 and round 2. So what they usually do here is that after you have seen which numbers the other people have chosen, and how often these numbers were chosen, that we play the whole thing once again and see how people change behavior or whether they change behavior. So what you see here, this greenish things are the frequencies of the numbers chosen. And you see that also indeed 25 in 2014 in the first round, 25 was the most often chosen number. And there's some other numbers, like I think this is perhaps again 17 or so, then was chosen quite often, some zeros and also some numbers above 50. But what you see also is that once you give the information and see, okay, oh yeah, many people have chosen 25, and some have and quite some have chosen 17, and you play this this again, then you see that the numbers get smaller. So the chosen numbers get smaller because then the most often chosen number in round 2, so after the information about the behavior of other people, is around, what is it, 5, 6, or 7 in this area. So you take into account, or people take into account, the information they receive about the behavior of other, because of course you have to best respond in a sense to what you believe other people are doing. And in first instance, in the first round, you have just an idea what other do. This could be wrong or right, or far off, or close by the true choices of people. But of course, when we give you information about the first round, then people or you have a better idea of what people are doing. And it's very similar in 2018. There have been the numbers in the first round have been a little bit lower. So it was about between somewhere, this is again 2020, 21. This is around 17. But what you also see also in the second round again, so these are the white bars here, the numbers got much lower, and this is something you can see over and over again. And if we would have played this with you, I'm pretty sure, so as for a second round, I'm pretty sure we would have seen this the very same outcome. So that's your behavior, but so that's in a sense not new. So I'm sorry to tell you, you're also not special in this respect, because this goes back to an early study in 1995 by Rosie Nagel. What you see here is that's very basically the same game we've just played, but this tells you, okay, here are the numbers people have chosen in the first round, and here are the numbers people have chosen in the second round. And you see most of the numbers are below the 45-degree line, which means that the numbers chosen in the second round are all lower than the numbers, or almost all and lower than the numbers chosen in the first period, was basically saying the same as what you've just seen on the graphs before. This is, if you then move, you can also repeat it more often. So these are the numbers chosen in the second round, and these are the numbers chosen in the third round. And what you see, the numbers get even closer to zero. And if you play this for four rounds, then you see that after 4 rounds, many numbers, almost all numbers, are close to the Nash equilibrium already, at least in the neighborhood of the Nash equilibrium. At least, I mean, there are no big numbers anymore. So people learn by taking into account the information, and my sort of behavior converges to the Nash equilibrium, or at least comes close to it. But you need some repetition and learning going on to get this effect. And you do not see the Nash equilibrium play in the first place. There also have been experiments run with this. So this was with students in Spain, but there also have been run in newspapers and magazines with representative or more general population, and you see very similar things here. So these are the numbers chosen at different. This is Financial Times readers, Spectrum, a German magazine readers, and Expansión, a Spanish reader, and you again see that there. So these are the frequencies of the chosen numbers. These are the numbers from 0 to 100. You see there are some close to 0, but there are many, a whole bunch of numbers somewhere between 0 and 50, and some even further above. So it's basically showing you kind of the same behavior as you have shown, or you have shown, and also the other Studium Generale audiences have shown. Okay, so now we have seen this, this example that the Nash equilibrium is not a great prediction. So of course people then started thinking, okay, can we come up with changes in the game theoretical concept, in the game theoretical thinking, which could perhaps explain this behavior, and that led to the so-called level K model. And the basic idea of this model is that player forms an expectation of what others will do. And I'm pretty sure when you chose your number, this is precisely what you did, right? You chose your number, you thought about, okay, if I want to win this game, it's 1/2 of the average of all numbers. So I need to take into account what all others do. You've taken this into account, and then you've calculated a likely winning number for you. Okay. Because, and what does it mean if you try to calculate the likely winning number? That you try to be one step ahead of the others. You think, okay, the others choose all 50. Then, of course, so 1/2 of them will be 25. So you will choose 25 if you want to win this game. So in the 1/2 guessing game that we played, so you can form expectations of others and then choose 1/2 of this average. So if you think on average the others choose 50, then you should choose 25. But this can also be generalized. So 1/2 is just an example. You can also take 1/3 or 1/4 of the average, or 2/3 of the average, and so on. And then it basically tells you, so that's if you want a general rule. So if the others are expected to choose on average, say 50, then you should choose P50. If the others are expected to choose on average P times 50, then you choose P to the power of 250, and so on. Right? That's the basic idea. That's Vincent Crawford who basically came up and popularized this idea. So what's behind this is that they start with people. So if you analyze behavior of real people, not players, you start with assuming that they're people of type 0. And these are people who do not choose rationally, or not even boundedly rationally. They perhaps just choose something because they are not interested in the game, or they choose without thinking, whatever the reason is. In a sense, the idea is that they just choose a random number between 0 and 100. If you're an L1 type, then you take this into account. So if an L1 type thinks that all others are of type L0, and taking this into account, so taking the belief that all others are of type 0, maximizes her or his payoff given this expectation. So you think all others are choosing randomly, so then you choose your strategy such that you have the best strategy against those choosing randomly. If you're and higher type, so if you type L2, then you take into account that there are these lower types L1 and L0. So you know that there are L0 types who choose randomly, but you know that there are L1 types who choose the best strategy against the L0 types, but you think you're one step ahead even further. So then you will take into account that the L1 types are taking the best response to L0, and you will take your best response or your best choice given your beliefs about how the L1 types will behave. And one can go on with this up to infinity if you want. Okay, so that's perhaps a little bit abstract. What does it mean in terms of concrete examples? Just that's a side remark. That's a very this level K model is a very simple model because, for instance, it assumes that the L1 players assume that all others are L0 players. The L2 players assume that all others are L1 players. These are very restrictive assumptions and most likely not true. So people might think that one is level 0, some are at level 0, some at level 1, some at level 2, and so on. And it's relatively easy to generalize this in this sense, and that's then called the cognitive hierarchy model, which was developed by Colin Cameron and co-authors. But coming back to the level K, so what does it mean in an example? So if you have a B guessing game, so we played the 1/2 guessing game, but as said, so there's also 2/3 or 1/3 guessing game. So what would these different types choose here? Okay, for L0, we assume, for level 0 players, we assume that they just choose random, which means on average they choose 50, independent of the B here. If you're an L1 type, you're best responding to the L0 types, which means you should choose, in this case, 1/2 of this belief here. In this case, you choose 2/3 of this belief here. And in this case, you choose 1/3 of this belief here, right? So because these are the best strategies you have against these beliefs. If you're an L2 types, you choose the best strategies against these people here. And that means for the half game, you choose 12.5, for the 2/3 game, 22.2, or if you're only integer numbers, 22, and here it would 89. And for level 3 players, it would be even lower, and that's how it unravels. Here it would be 6, 15, and 100. So the question is, okay, so I don't know, so you can now think about what level you are, so what number you have chosen, and whether this was also the thinking that was going on in your mind when doing so. So of course there are also estimations on how many of these different types are around. So one interesting observation is that so researchers very seldom find that people are higher than level 3 reasoners, right? Because in principle, of course, you could go on, but that's not very often found. At least if you play this game just once, right? Of course, if you play this game more often, then people might learn and they might start to reason on a higher level. So these are some estimates of L1, L2, and L3 types. Forget about this. It's the lower. These are other types, not so important here. And these are different numbers coming from different ways of estimating this, but the upshot is here, if you, let's say, focus on the econometrics specification, you see here that many people are in this in this research, in this study, many people are actually level 1. Quite some are also level 2, and only few are level 3. And this is also what you see back, because what you have seen in your the numbers you have chosen, you know, the most prominent number or the most often chosen number was 25, which basically, so this was the biggest number in the word cloud. So which basically means indeed that the most people in the audience at least behaved as if they are a level 1 reasoners, and this is precisely what we see here too, right? So level 1 is the in all specifications, level 1 is the largest proportion of people, and L2 is coming thereafter, and L3 there are just a few of them. So yes, as I said, so you can think of what type are you. Okay, so this some behavioral evidence, but one interesting thing is also, I mean, how is this implemented in the brain? Because we also want to understand, okay, what are the cognitive processes behind this? Why do we want to understand this? Because we think that if you understand the cognitive neurobiological processes, we can also see or build better models that predict behavior in a better way. And this is just also testing this level K model on not only the behavioral level, but also on the level in brain activation. So what we do for that? In this case, researchers used what's called functional magnetic resonance imaging, which very broadly broad measures brain activity during decisions. You can do this during people make decisions. It doesn't measure direct brain activities and not the firing of neurons, but what it measures is the so-called BOLD signal, which is the blood oxygen level dependent contrast. What this means is basically, so if you make a decision, if a particular part of your brain is activated more than other parts, then there's blood flow to this part, because the brain needs energy. So the firing of the neurons needs energy, glucose, oxygen, and this blood flow can then be measured with the help of a magnetic field in the scanner. So it basically tracks the blood flow, the so-called hemodynamic response, which is induced by the activation, so the firing of the brain cells. Okay, so what does this the researchers do? So they played basically the guessing game we were playing, but then when people were lying in the scanner, and so they had different conditions. One condition, so one was similar to the one we played, namely that people in the scanner were playing the guessing game with other people who were not in the scanner, but who also chose the number. They were also playing against the computer, where they knew that the computer will just make a random choice. So it's like playing against a level 0 player. And they will also just choose, this was for some control, just choosing a random number. So what's interesting here is that if you contrast these two conditions, so if you compare the brain activation here and the brain activation here, then you can see whether people, because if you play against the computer, that's a level 0 condition, right? So then basically you know that you don't have to think higher than level 1. Because it doesn't make any sense. But if you play against a human, then you might have to think further, because there might be level 1 human players, and therefore you might have to engage other brain areas who are dealing with the fact that you have to put yourself into the shoes of others to make a good strategic choice in this game. So the basically then did is, you have so-called low-level players, and these are players who choose basically the same number against the computer and against humans. So against the computer, the most they have to do is to choose to do a level 1 choice. And if people did not change this when they're playing against human, they were categorized as low-level reasoners. However, if they were changing behavior from the computer to the human. So in this case, when they reduce the number, so you play, let's say 30 against the computer, but 24, 22 against the human, then it means, you take into account that the humans might have different ways of playing this game than the computer, who just chooses randomly. And this way you can categorize people within low and high reasoners. And what they then did is, so they were looking into the brain activation of these two types of reasoners, right? So low-level reasoners, let's say level 0 and level 1, and high-level reasoners, level 2 and higher. And what they saw is that indeed there was different activation in the brain. It's not so important what these brain areas exactly are, but what they basically saw here is that for low-level reasoners, there was brain areas activated who were mainly active for self-referential thinking. So these people did not think so much about what others are going to do. So we're not thinking about their beliefs about other people, but more about what they themselves should do, right? We're more focused on themselves, whereas the high-level reasoners were engaging the so-called medial, prefrontal cortex and the ventral medial prefrontal cortex. And these are areas, in particular the MPFC areas, which are engaged in so-called theory of mind. A theory of mind basically is your ability to put yourself into the shoes of others, to kind of understand and try to understand how others are reasoning in this kind of situation. So you try to understand how other people are playing this game, and this I see only in high-level reasoners and low-level reasoners. It basically tells you, okay, so there is something that like level K in the brain, because for different levels of reasoning, different brain areas are engaged. Okay, so that's about this, and I think I will skip the quantum response equilibrium here, which is kind of because it's 20 minutes to 9, right? Yes. So let me just give an upshot on the boundedly rational reasoning here. I can come back to the quantum response equilibrium if someone is interested in the Q&A, or if you have time at the end, also come back there. So what is the upshot of this boundedly rational part of my talk? We see, okay, in standard game theory, players, not humans, are perfectly rational. They make infinite iterations, no errors when choosing a strategy. In real, however, people are boundedly rational. They make often only a few iterations. I see maybe only one iteration, maybe two iterations in strategic thinking. And of course, they also make errors in choices. This would be something the quantum response equilibrium could explain. So behavioral game theoretical models like the level K cognitive hierarchy model allow for these constraints of the human mind. And therefore can also then explain the observed behavior of real people. And as you have also seen now in the last couple of slides, this also receives some neurobiological support. So it's not only that people behave that way, but it's really triggers different neurobiological processes, whether people are thinking deeply about the strategic process or do not think that deeply about this process. Okay, let me come to the second part. I also would like to say a little bit about in the last 20 minutes or so. And this is about behavior in social interaction problem. Just take some water, sorry. Okay. So, and for that, I would like to talk a little bit of so-called collective good problems. So that's kind of the workhorse to talk about behavior and social interactions, social interaction problems. Why is this interesting? Because humans, or we, are very special in the sense that we can work together at a very large scale, right? I mean, we can also be very mean to each other, as we know, but all together, so we are one of the most cooperative species in this world. Of course, there are other animals who are very good in large-scale cooperation, in particular ants and termites, bees, wasps, but so AU animals. So but these are, so there the cooperation is mostly triggered by relation, right? So the ants in an ants heap, or the wasp in a wasp state, are basically all genetically related, and that's one of the reasons why they cooperate with each other, because it helps surviving their genes which are related. And what's unique in humans, in a sense, is that we are able and willing to cooperate with strangers, right? We do not know. I mean, you might cooperate with people via the internet in nowadays, people you do not even see, right? Or you have no idea who it is, and that's really kind of unique, and therefore I think it's interesting to try to understand this. And these are just, I mean, these are more profane examples. So one gives you, you know, fishermen building a boat together, or no, it's not a boat, it's a big fish, sorry. And for instance, the Amish people building a barn together is just as a prototype of larger scale human cooperation. So the question is, I mean, how does this come about, and when does it happen, and under what circumstances does this happen? Just see. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh. Okay. Okay. So what I talk about is okay. So I said the collective good problem. So what is the collective good problem? We need to define this. So contributing to the collective good is costly to oneself, but it benefits if others contribute, and all benefit if all contribute. So there's a tension. That means on the one hand, you know, if you contribute to the collective good, it's costly. So therefore, you have an incentive not to do this. You have an incentive that the others, or try to make the others contribute to the collective good, because then you get something out of this. And if all benefit, then if all contribute, then all benefit from the public good. So examples for that are keeping the neighborhood clean. So of course, I'm sure you'd like a clean neighborhood, but perhaps you would like to that your neighbor is going to clean it and not you yourself. Or building a dike, right, is costly, but of course, you know, everyone is better off once the dike is built. Reducing greenhouse gases, of course, everyone will benefit, or many people will benefit by reducing or by mitigating climate change, but it's costly, as we know. You know, you have to insulate your house, you have to change your heating system, things like that. Or also, of course, recently getting vaccinated. So there is some cost involved with getting vaccinated, of course. I mean, you get some stuff into your body you might not like. It might even hurt you. You have side effects. But on the other hand, you also it might help yourself, but it also helps, you know, society, because if everyone gets vaccinated, then you know, the spread of the virus is at least slowed down quite a bit. Whereas if you're the only one who is vaccinated, then this doesn't make sense. And if you would know that no one else would get vaccinated, I'm pretty sure, or it's very unlikely that you yourself would be the one who's getting vaccinated, right? So that's kind of the problem behind this. So, and I think it's important to understand if and when people contribute to this collective. For that, let me just give you an example where we implemented such an experiment in the Netherlands on the internet. So this would be a collective good experiment. So you see here 3 people, and each of them has what we call an endowment of, let's say, 20 euro, right? And everyone can put 20 euros, any amount of this 20 euros into the middle of the table. And that's basically saying, okay, I'm going to invest into this collective good. And if everyone does this, then the sum of the investments here in the middle of the table are multiplied by 1.5. And then are then distributed evenly back, right? So, which means that if everyone puts everything in, then at the end, everyone is richer, right? So they started out with having everyone 20, everyone puts everything in, then at the end, everyone has 30. So that's definitely better than before. However, and that's important, there's a free riders incentive. So let's say that the green and the blue put in all their 20 tokens or 20 euro, but this person here does not. I mean, then that's 40. So that's going to be 60 altogether, and then it's going to be distributed evenly. But then it means that these people, so 60 divided by 3 is everyone gets 20. So this person gets 20, this person gets 20, but this person then in total has 40, right? Because he or she kept the 20, receives 20 back, just 40, and that's often obviously better than the 30 here, and that's the incentive of hoping that the others contribute and that you yourself do not contribute. So that's kind of the tension in this kind of collective action problems between the individual benefit and in this case the group benefit or societal benefit of this little society of 3 people. Standard game theory says precisely of that, for that reason, that you should not contribute to the collective good, because it is a dominant strategy. We had this before with the guessing game. It's a dominant strategy not to contribute to the collective good. So because whatever the others do, you're better off by not contributing. Okay, so the question is this what we see also in when people play this kind of games, right? So and show you here some outcomes of these experiments with around 1,000 Dutch people. What you will see here is this contribution to the collective good. So it's basically the number of people or the number of euro people put into the middle of the table on average out of 20. And we have repeated this game, this experiment for 6 rounds. And in each round, this were 3 different people. So this person, so if this is you, then you were playing against players, let's say, Joop and Theo in round 1, but with Mike and I don't know, Ben in the second round, and again other people in the third round. And we did this for 6 rounds because we were interested to see, okay, how does the voluntary contribution to the public good evolve over the rounds. Okay, so what we see is that in the first round, people contribute a little bit less than 50% of the 20, so 8 or 9, something like this. So people do contribute. So already this tells you that the Nash equilibrium prediction is not correct, which should mean there is a 0. But what's happening if you do this, repeat this, then you see that the contributions go down, So it's not that they go down to 0, but if you would repeat this very, very often, then it's very likely that it's getting lower and lower. But the important thing here is to see that there is a decrease in contributions to the collective good over time. So people seem to learn to become more selfish, in a sense, if you want. So how can we explain such behavior? And one way of explaining this is in behavioral game theory, that we allow for reciprocity, or in this case for conditional cooperation. What do we mean with that? It's basically if others contribute, I contribute. If others do not contribute, I also do not contribute. Or if you want to take it biblical, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. So more scientifically, so what you see here is this is the average contribution level of others in the group. So if you think about this here, so that would be the contribution of this person sitting here, where you don't see the face. No, sorry. So this is the contribution of those you don't see the face. It's basically, let's say this is you. So that's the own contribution, and this is the average contribution of the 2 others at the table, right? So what you believe, for instance, what the others are going to contribute. And what we see here is that there are 3 types of people. So if those here, these are the easiest one. So those people always contribute 0, no matter what the others contribute. Whether the others contribute 0, 10, 15, or 20, they always contribute 0. So these are the game theorists, if you want, right? So they are free riding all the time. They do not contribute at all. Then there are those hump-shaped, which are hard to explain. So I don't want to put too much emphasis on them, but what they do, nevertheless, let's just say, so they increase their contributions up to a point of 10 when the others contribute 10, up to 10, and when the others start to contribute more, then they also start to contribute less again. And the third group, that's the most interesting one. It's also the largest group. It's about 50% of the people. What they do is they tend to contribute more. So here they contribute more, the more the others contribute. So because there is this increasing line here, but, and that's important, so they do not exactly match the others, right? So if they believe that the others contribute 20, they do not contribute 20, but they contribute 14, right? A little less. Or if they believe that the others, let's say, contribute that, if they believe that the others contribute then 10, like this here, then they themselves contribute 7, about 7, right? And so on. So these conditional cooperators match, but they do not fully match. So there's some kind of incomplete reciprocation, incomplete conditional cooperation. And if you take the average of all this, then you get this thick line here, right? Which is also an average and incomplete cooperation line. So we find conditional cooperation, and together with positive beliefs that can explain positive contributions. So if I believe that others are going to contribute and I am a conditional cooperator, then of course I will also contribute, but I will contribute less than I believe the other will contribute, and this is the incomplete part of this. And this can explain the erosion over time of positive contributions, because if I start out with contributing 10, and then I see that the others only contribute 9, then perhaps next time I will also not contribute 10 anymore, but 8, and so on, and then it's going down over time. So, but one can give a twist to this by giving the possibility, after you have observed how much the others put in the middle of the table. So let's say you are the one who put in 20 and you see that the others do not put anything in, then you're allowed to take away or to punish the others by a cost to yourself, right? So you see that the others are free riding, then you might take away money from them, but the money does not go to you, but somewhere else, and you also have to pay money for this. And because you yourself are worse off after you have punished or taken away the money from the others, again, standard game theory says that sanctioning, so this kind of sanctioning, does not take place and should thus not have an effect. And let's see what's happening. So what we see here, this is just what we saw before. This is a collective good problem without the sanctioning. The contributions to the collective good go down. If we have sanctioning, so there's not much of a difference in round 1 between these two versions, so without sanctioning and with sanctioning. But what we see is over time, the dynamics are very different. So when there is a sanctioning possibility, then we see that collective good contributions do not go down, but rather they go up, right? So, and it basically tells you that if there's a sanctioning threat, contributions to the collective good increase over time. This gives you just some more details. I don't want to go too much into detail here now, but it basically tells you that high contributors, so those who contribute to the collective good themselves a lot, they punish those who do contribute little, even if this is costly for them. So therefore, the sanctioning of free riding is an act of reciprocity, because selfish people should never do this, right? Because it's a cost to yourself. So sanctioning of free riding is an act of reciprocity, and reciprocal sanctioning can explain this increase in contributions we have seen here. And this is another example where you see an increase in contributions over time. So do we have still time? 5 minutes? Okay, so I want to introduce very quickly. So the ultimatum game, that's yet another game we analyze in game theory channel and in behavioral game theory, and that goes like that. It's a simple game. Many of you might have heard of it. Let me explain it. So proposer ball makes a proposal how to divide 20 euro, and the responder can accept or reject the proposal he receives. If he accepts, then both earn according to the proposal. If they reject, both earn nothing, right? Standard game theory here predicts that assuming preferences that value only one's own payment, so selfishness, then the responder accepts any proposal larger than 0. So why that? Because more money is better than no money, or let's say more money is better than less money. And if I get €1, then I should accept it, because if I do not accept it, then both are nothing. So then I also would get 0. And the proposer anticipates this, and that therefore offers the lowest amount which is still accepted. And in this case, this would be €1. So the question is, do people do this? So what you see here is the responders' behavior. So note, responders should accept everything which is larger than 0. But what this shows here is this is the minimum accepted amount. So, but if you see a 10 here, then that means that this responder would reject everything which is smaller than 10. This responders everything which is smaller than 9. Everything is smaller than 8, and so on. So, and this would be the rational, or this would be the game theory players who accept also an offer of 0. So this also comes from Studium Generale participants in 2014, and very similar in 2018. So you see quite a number of people who would not accept anything less than half of the money on the table. Quite some who would be okay with 40%, and quite some who would be okay with 25%, but not with anything lower. Right. So yeah, that's just from another study, and it's basically telling you the same story. So basically what the upshot here is that low offers, or very low offers, are often rejected, which is again evidence for reciprocity. Because why it is costly reciprocity? Because rejecting an offer, a positive offer, if it's too low, so if it, let's say if it is 10 or €5 out of 20, to reject this, you basically lose €5, because if you accept it, you would get it. If you reject it, you get €0. And we interpret this that a costly reciprocation against, in this case, an act or a proposal that is considered unfair. I skipped this. I'm sorry, because we're running out of time. Because I want to say a little bit about what we know about how the brain, in a sense, responds to, let's say, unfair offers. We've just seen that people reject unfair offers. So the question is, I mean, which parts of the brain are involved in this kind of behavior? We'll do this in a few minutes, and then I'm done. So what we do this, so what we can do is we can intervene in brain areas. And going to do this with an area which is related to cognitive self-control. And with a technique that's called transcranial magnetic stimulation. What basically does is it downregulates parts of the brain which are responsible for your self-control of selfishness, if you want. Or that's the idea. That was basically the test, whether this particular brain area does control your selfishness. And but this was done by a study by Knoch and others. So what do you see here? So people were playing against this ultimatum game, playing against a human proposer who made an offer, 16 out of 20 for me and 4 to you, right? There's the so-called sham condition, and the sham condition is the condition where there's no intervention with the brain. And what you see here is that the acceptance rate was very low, right? So if people is offered 4 out of 20 and the other one gets 16, then only 10% or so accept such an offer. If you downregulate the right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, particular part of your brain, then what you see is that these acceptance rates go up to 50%, which basically tells you that this part of the brain is responsible for accepting or rejecting unfair offers. And interestingly, so people, they were also asked how they should rate the fairness of this offer, and everyone, with or without this brain intervention, thought, yeah, this is a very unfair offer anyway. Right? Okay. And the question is, I mean, is this that people just don't like this 1640 offer, or is it because it comes from a human, so that another human gets this money? So therefore, they were also playing this against the computer, but the computer made the 16 to 40 offer, and then we see here basically no difference. So first of all, the acceptance rates were much higher because, I mean, okay, the computer just makes a random choice, so why should you punish the computer for the unfairness? And there, you also see that there is no difference, or at least no significant difference across these conditions with whether or not you downregulate the brain activity. Okay. So what we have learned, so data indicate that the dorsal prefrontal cortex plays an important role in overriding or weakening the self-interested impulses to accept unfair offers, and this means that our fairness seems to be cognitive rather than effective. So it's seems not so much been an emotional response, but really a cognitive response to reject unfair offers. So what's the upshot? Here, standard game theory, assuming selfish players cannot explain cooperation, common goods problems, sanctioning of free riders, rejection of unfair offers, positive offers without threat of rejection. Behavioral game theory, when we allow for reciprocity and fair-mindedness, can explain all of the above. I quickly summarize. So what we've seen, and I hope I could convince you a little bit about this. Standard game theory is a powerful tool for analyzing strategic situations. I mean, this is what you learn in this whole lecture series, and I still think it is, but it has important limitations. I think, or we think, experimental game theory has important tools for exploring real people's behavior. Behavioral game theory can organize this real people's behavior by allowing for bounded rationality, reciprocity, fair-mindedness, and also in the meanwhile, also other concepts. I just could give you a very brief and quick overview. And neuroeconomics can deliver neuronal insights for building biological plausible models. So if you understand the neurobiological underpinnings of the behavior, we could also perhaps create models that come closer to real people's behavior and predict this behavior in a more accurate way. The presented methods hopefully help in achieving insights for renovating or generalizing standard game theory and lead perhaps to a game theory 2.0. And I think that's it. So there are some further readings for those who are interested. I don't know whether we can share the, I just show, because this is recorded, so I just let this stand for a second and ask Noor for taking over.
Yes. So thank you very much for this really nice presentation. I think we all learned again a lot today. I think we also would have loved to have this lecture in real life regarding the money winning part. Yeah, so if we have any questions.
Should we make a short break of 2 minutes for?
Yeah, definitely. So we can have a break of 3 minutes. Like you can go to toilet, grab something to drink, and then we come back later.
So we can, I would say now it's 6 minutes past 9. Should we come together again at 10 past 9? That's 4 minutes? Okay.
Yeah, that's good. So we're back, everyone. I hope you could have a nice short break. I see a lot of people still stayed. So yeah, we don't have a lot. Oh, we got a new question in the Q&A. Here's one from Caleb Schneider, sorry. He's like asking, is the example given at the end, it was seen that people were less likely to use reciprocal behavior sanctions on the random decisions of a computer as compared to the decision of a human player. Do you know of any work that has looked into whether people are more likely to accept outcomes that they perceive to come from random processes rather than from direct actors? I imagine this theory could potentially have implications for theories of social control and our pacification strategies.
Okay. That's a very intriguing and question. Let me try to. I don't know of a study who by heart who looked into precisely this, but there is research perhaps which is kind of related. This is into procedural fairness. So what we see, for instance, that if let's say an unfair outcome is produced by a procedure that is fair, then this is rather accepted than if it comes from a procedure that is unfair. So what one could in this case, so if you see that, let's say that people punish, if someone is forced to throw a die, which then the outcome is that that you are treating or that the other person is treated, let's say, unfair, then that would be rather accepted than one knows that this person deliberately took this decision of treating another one unfair. So this is something we see very often, and I think that's also very important insight. Also, let's say in for policy that that unfair outcomes are accepted or more easily accepted if they're implemented with a fair procedure, but at the same time that fair outcomes might not be accepted if they're implemented by an unfair procedure. I'm not sure whether this answers the question precisely, but that's what I would have to say for now for that.
Okay, I think that was pretty clear. We also have another question from an anonymous person. He's also asking, the cooperational projects do not follow the standard game theory laws, but I would guess that they are affected by circumstances nonetheless. So the extent to which people work together differs in real life, right? What are the most important factors affecting this?
Good question. Again, difficult question. In particular, what are the most important factors is difficult to say. But there are some factors we know that that they do. So, I mean, one is and related to what I also told about, you know, the conditional cooperation. I mean, what we know is that most people are conditional cooperators. So therefore, it's very important to have information. So for people who are potentially willing to cooperate, to provide information about the cooperation of the others, right? So with vaccination, for instance, I think many people are willing to be vaccinated if others are also willing to be vaccinated, or people are willing to contribute to, I don't know, some public good in the Netherlands if they know that the others would also be contributing to this. I think that's an important factor. Another factor is what we also that leadership is also important. And here particular leading by example. So if you have, I mean, just to give you the example now, and that I think is pretty obvious, of Boris Johnson in the UK, who basically did not adhere to his own rules about, let's say, how to behave in the COVID pandemic. I mean, that's just bad leadership, right? So because it basically tells people, you know, my leader doesn't care about this, so why should I care? But you also have the other positive effect, and this might lead then, of course, to less cooperative behavior in this case, you know, that you keep distance, for instance. But of course, you also have it in the other way. So if leaders with a positive aura, let's say, are behaving in, let's say, a cooperative way, then this also affects the cooperation of people who are not leaders. I mean, these are just two examples. I mean, there are other things too. For instance, fairness considerations play always a very important role. So we have run also another experiment I did not present here, where we try to understand how people are willing to form institutions that help to overcome a collective action problem. So that lead to, so in a sense, we were asking people, okay, are you willing to bound yourself to be cooperative, even if it's costly, by an institution, right? So it's basically like asking, okay, are you willing to have a tax authority who enforces you to pay taxes, for instance, right? And what we see is that people are very much willing to do this, namely, to create an institution which by themselves, which lead to to potential punishment if you do not follow the rules of this institution. But they are only willing to do this if most other people also do this, right? So if most other people are also bound to these rules, and I think that's, for instance, one of the big problems in mitigation of climate change, that it's very difficult, it's very difficult to get it organized, that most states are willing to contribute to mitigate the climate change, because if as soon as, let's say, big players are not part of it, then a small country like the Netherlands might ask itself, okay, why should we, reduce CO2 if the big players don't do it? So that's and that, of course, has to do with fairness considerations, because it's just not just, right, that if you yourself are contributing, whereas the others don't.
I think it's also very interesting to see how these models like fit into politics and life today. Lydia is also asking a question in the chat. How can the experimental behavior insights applied in real life context, and how about the corrected economic models? Maybe that's also fitting to that one.
Okay, so this were two questions. So what's it mean for real life? First of all, so the experiments we do, I always try to say, are real life. So even if there's some with students, because students are real people, and they make in these experiments, people make real choices with real monetary consequences. So this is not hypothetical in the experiments I've presented and we conduct. But of course, it's still laboratory situations, or now we also do experiments online. It's kind of artificial. So the question is, I mean, does this translate to behavior outside the laboratory? And there's more and more evidence that it is the case. Right? So I've myself done a study a couple of years ago with a colleague here from Maastricht, where we tried to understand the reason why people invest social responsible. So why people do buy social responsible investments. And what we did is we measured in the laboratory, we measured the social preferences of people, so how willing they are to take the welfare of others into account, and correlated this with their actual investment behavior on financial markets. And what we see is that the social preferences measured in the laboratory are actually predictive for the behavior on real financial markets. So there are aspects. So the laboratory behavior, not one-to-one, of course, but to some extent translates into behavior outside the laboratory. In terms of policy, it depends, of course, here on the precise question we are asking. But and I think I repeat myself. I think one thing is that we should not forget, or I think it's very important to understand that we are cooperative, conditionally cooperative beings. So, and I think therefore it's super important to tell people that others, so when others also cooperative, to tell people that the others are also cooperative, because, and to try to find ways to stop, eroding of cooperation, or of cooperative behavior, because this can really, erode very quickly, because if too many people do not cooperate anymore, then this also triggers those conditional cooperators not to cooperate anymore. So that's one thing. The other thing is also that I think there is just, so also want to say one thing, Homo economicus exists, right? It's not the case that all people are conditional, cooperative, or altruistic. We find this in the experiments. Almost there are 10 to 15% of the people are selfish, right? And this basically means for this kind of people, that doesn't help any nudge or any information given about the cooperation of others, which also means in this case, it just means you need rules, right? You mean laws, so you cannot do it without laws. If you want to get, let's say, 100% cooperation, then you have to force this 10%, or you have to live with the fact that there will be 10% who will not cooperate. And in terms of models, yes, I don't know. So I'm not sure precisely what the question here is, but there are models developed who try to, for instance, the level K model is such a model which tries to implement the bounded rationality into the models and therefore predict real people's behavior. And there are many, in the meanwhile, many models of so-called social preferences on the market, so to say, which take into account that people are taking the welfare of others into account, or are prone to fairness considerations, in the sense, that they'd like to be treated fairly. They also like to be that others are treated fairly. And there are models now developed which take this into account. I mean, they are all not perfect yet, but there is quite some research underway which I think goes into a good direction in helping explaining real people's behavior better than the standard model does. Standard models do, so to get it right.
Okay, thanks. Then we have time for 2 more questions, I would say, regarding the time. One got upvoted from Caleb. He was curious, also in a research kind of way, if perhaps different cultural groups perform differently on games. For example, cultural groups placing a higher value on group cooperation over individualism may perform differently on cooperative games. Is this something that has been or is being researched in the field?
Yeah, very good question also. Yes, yes, it is. So there are two kinds of answers to this. So there has been already quite some time ago a relatively large study in many different societies, also with small scale societies, different cultures, and so the 2 answers are there are let's say similarities and there are differences. So when we talk about, let's say, something like reciprocal behavior or conditional cooperation, this is pretty universal. Right? There's basically there's basically no culture where you find people where you do not find that reciprocal behavior is not important. The same is true for fairness considerations, right? So that's also pretty universal. So people like to be treated fair, and also people are willing to sanction unfair behavior against themselves, but also against others. And this also has been shown in different cultures. However, of course, there are also differences. So it's not the case that if you look, let's say, at the percentage of conditional cooperators, that they are exactly the same in each culture, right? But this is already true not only in cultures, this is already true within a country too, right? So it might be, for instance, if you run, let's say, within the Netherlands, the experiments with 2 different socioeconomic groups, that you find differences there. There's also a huge amount of heterogeneity across people, right? So you find if you measure social preferences, then you find really everything from being totally selfish to being super altruistic, and everything in between. So I think that this is actually, in some extent, I find it even this more intriguing and more difficult to explain. So to explain this individual differences, because of course you have differences across cultures, but I think if you compare it to this individual differences, then actually the cultural differences are smaller than those between individuals. Having said this, there are also some studies who also relate to that also institutions play a role, the institutional environment. So in this one study I mentioned, where people were comparing, for instance, this collective good problem I just showed you before, that this differs across cultures, and so the behavior there. So some cultures are more cooperative, so more willing to voluntarily contribute to the collective good, and it's always on average, and some on average are less. And what was there found, so one interesting result was that so this was with small scale societies, when the market integration was stronger, then people were tending to have more voluntary contribution to the public good, right? So those who were exposed to other people, so to say, on the marketplace. So you have to think, okay, these are small scale societies, and some of them brought the products to the market and interacted on the market with these other people where this sold and bought stuff, and others did not have to. They were totally self-sustained. So, and you see that those who are self-sustained are less cooperative in a sense than those who had this market interaction. This was quite an intriguing, because also a little bit perhaps counterintuitive result.
Yeah, definitely. Then we have time for our last question. Is from Pranav. He asks, does the Nash equilibrium still being used when it comes to the placement of shops? If yes, how similar is it with the Hotelling's law that states to make similar products?
So sorry, can you repeat this? I'm not sure.
Oh yes. So he asked whether the Nash equilibrium is still being used when it comes to the placement of shops. Yes, how similar is it with the law of the hotels that states Hotelling's law that states to make similar products?
Okay, yeah. I mean, this is the Nash. I mean, the Nash. So in Hotelling's model, it is actually the Nash equilibrium that is used, right? So Hotelling's law is the Nash equilibrium of this game. And what was the first question? Was whether it's still used, or?
Yeah, whether it's still used when it comes to the placement of shops.
Frankly, I don't know. So I have no idea whether this is still the case. But yeah, I have to admit I don't know.
Yeah, we can leave this one open. Okay, I think yeah, then I think we have to round up now. It's already 21:30, but thank you so much, Arno, for also staying and answering all the questions, for being patient with the questions, yeah, thanks you all for joining. We see each other next week, same time. Yeah, and I hope you enjoyed the lecture.
Okay, thank you very much, and yeah, I also enjoyed it, and thank Nor. And yeah, this kind of things happen.
Okay. We made it work somehow.
Yeah. Have a good night. Bye-bye, everyone.
Good night.